Cop accuses black woman of trespassing in a rich neighborhood, then learns she owns the entire block. A single uniformed officer steps out of his patrol car under the sweltering California sun, hands hovering above his belt. His gaze narrows on a poised, elegant black woman in a wide-brimmed hat standing in front of a stately mansion in Beverly Hills. There's a tension in the air that crackles like electricity. Onlookers whisper, uncertain of what they're witnessing. Is she trespassing in this affluent neighborhood? The officer certainly thinks so. Yet beneath that calm exterior lies an extraordinary secret. This woman isn't just visiting. She owns the entire block. Sparks will fly and consequences will unfold in ways no one sees coming. Dahlia Summers adjusted the brim of her straw hat, trying to block the harsh midday glare as she strolled down Brighton Way in the heart of Beverly Hills. The palm-lined avenues were familiar territory to her, an area she frequently visited to manage real estate deals and high-end renovation projects. Yet today felt different, as if invisible eyes were following her every move. She'd parked her sleek obsidian-black Tesla Model S near a row of extravagant boutiques, intending to finalize paperwork on her latest investment property. Dahlia was in a buoyant mood. After all, it wasn't every day a young black woman from a modest background found herself buying property in one of the world's most exclusive neighborhoods. Even in well-tailored slacks and a silk blouse, Dahlia felt the sideways glances from passers-by. She'd grown used to that over the years, people consistently underestimating her. She smiled at the memory of her father's old advice. Hold your head high, Dahlia. Don't ever let folks tell you where you belong. But as she stepped onto the pristine sidewalk in front of a white mansion with towering columns, her phone buzzed. A text from her attorney, Melanie Park, read, "Papers ready. Waiting for your signature at the property. Code for the gate is 4490. At that moment, a Beverly Hills Police Department cruiser eased down the street, pulling up beside her. The vehicle's lights were off, but the watchful stare of the uniformed officer inside was unmistakable. Dahlia pretended not to notice as she continued toward the mansion's ornate iron gate. This wasn't the first time an officer had seemed suspicious of her presence in a well-to-do area. As Dahlia neared the gate, she felt a chill in the air despite the afternoon sun. From the corner of her eye, she saw the squad car's door open and a figure step onto the curb. She took a breath, focusing on her phone, ignoring the wave of apprehension that washed over her. If this officer was about to question her, she would calmly, confidently set the record straight, just as she'd done countless times before. Little did she know that today's encounter would prove to be far more than a passing irritation. It would unravel deeply seated prejudice, reveal hidden truths, and set in motion events that would shake Beverly Hills to its core. "Excuse me, ma'am," came the firm voice from behind her. Dahlia paused, then turned with a cordial smile. Standing there was Officer Darren Cole, his green eyes sharp beneath the brim of his police cap. The tension in his posture made it clear he was already on high alert. She inhaled slowly, attempting to steady her nerves before responding. "Yes, officer. Can I help you?" Her tone was polite, but unwavering. She clutched the phone in one hand, resisting the urge to cross her arms defensively. She'd done nothing wrong. "You a resident here?" he asked. He cast a quick glance at the imposing mansion behind the wrought iron gate. The question was pointed-laced with a skepticism she'd encountered too many times to count. Dahlia attempted a neutral shrug. In a way, she answered, "I'm here to handle some personal business." She debated whether to elaborate, but her father's old lessons rang in her ears. Always keep your cool. Always. The officer's expression hardened. Is that your house? He pressed. We've had reports of suspicious activity. You mind telling me exactly why you're standing here? A trickle of anger threatened to break Dahlia's calm facade. Suspicious activity indeed. It was more likely that someone wealthy in the neighborhood had spotted a black woman walking alone by a white mansion and decided to call the police. She forced her jaw to relax before she spoke. Well, Officer Cole, my name is Dahlia Summers, and I'm meeting my attorney inside. We have a meeting in a few minutes. She gestured at the phone. I have the access code for the gate right here. Attorney, he repeated, skeptical. And what business do you have with an attorney at a private residence? He took a step closer, clearly intending to loom over her. Dahlia refused to retreat. I'd prefer to discuss that once I'm on the property, she replied. It's frankly no one's business but my own. Officer Cole pursed his lips. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to provide some identification. If you're here on legitimate business, that shouldn't be a problem. A spark of indignation flared inside her, but Dahlia knew better than to let it show openly. She reached into her purse. Of course, officer, she said, her voice measured. Even so, an internal storm brewed, one that promised to erupt if the situation escalated further. Handing over her driver's license, Dahlia noticed Officer Cole's eyes flick over the details, his gaze momentarily surprised. Her address listed an upscale neighborhood in Los Angeles, not some area he might presume for a woman like her. Beverly Hills was only a stone's throw from her home, but it was a world apart in perceived status. Cole cleared his throat. Miss Summers, it's routine for me to check out all calls. We had a resident dial in claiming someone was trespassing. We're just trying to keep the neighborhood safe. She resisted the urge to roll her eyes. Understood, she replied crisply. But as you can see, I'm just here to meet my attorney. His walkie-talkie crackled with static, and a voice on the other end asked if backup was needed. Dahlia's heart pounded uncomfortably at the notion. Was he really going to escalate this situation? Officer Cole eyed her once more, hesitation flickering across his face. Perhaps he sensed he didn't have a legitimate reason to hold her here. Nonetheless, he lifted the radio to his lips. All good dispatch, he responded, eyes still fixed on Dahlia. False alarm. He handed her ID back. Look. He began, sounding somewhat conciliatory. Try to understand. We get calls about suspicious people all the time. If you have legitimate business, fine. But this area doesn't see a lot of foot traffic. Next time, you might want to drive a more expensive car. Dahlia interjected a hint of dry humor creeping into her voice. Because, officer, I'm in a Tesla. And with all due respect, I'd like to continue with my day. She stepped toward the gate and entered the code. The lock clicked open, and she pushed it aside, stepping onto the manicured grounds of what would soon be her latest investment property. Officer Cole watched her for a moment, uncertain, but he didn't follow. Instead, he radioed something back to dispatch, something Dahlia couldn't quite make out. Her pulse still raced, but as she walked toward the mansion's marble steps, a quiet resolve began to settle in her chest. The microaggression, the subtle hostility, it all fueled her deeper goal to own, to succeed, to show that she could thrive in spaces where many felt she did not belong. And ironically, the property she was about to finalize the paperwork on wasn't just this mansion, it was the entire city block that surrounded it. Inside the mansion's lavish foyer, Dahlia took a moment to gather herself, exhaling the tension lingering from the encounter outside. The interior was a dazzling display of polished floors, crystal chandeliers, and floor-to-ceiling windows that bathed the space in sunlight. It was stately, yes, but also felt oddly sterile, lacking the warmth of a lived-in home. Dahlia Melanie Park's voice echoed through the foyer light, but concerned. Her attorney, clad in a sleek navy pantsuit, emerged from a side room. Documents clutched in her arms. What happened outside? I saw the officer's car. Dahlia gave a dismissive wave. Just the usual. Someone called me in as a trespasser. I handled it. She pulled at the collar of her silk blouse, still feeling the heat of the confrontation on her neck. Let's not dwell on it. I'm ready to finalize these papers. Melanie regarded her friend and client with sympathetic eyes. I'm sorry you had to go through that. But I've got good news. The sale is all but yours. Just need a couple of signatures, and you'll be the official owner of not just this mansion, but the entire block of properties adjoining it. A sense of triumph warmed Dahlia's chest. It was a bold move, purchasing so many high-end parcels at once. She'd spent years researching development opportunities and forging alliances with local city planners. Her father, a modest real estate investor in South LA, had taught her the intricacies of property ownership. When he passed away, Dahlia vowed to continue his legacy, but on a grander scale. Now she was on the verge of fulfilling that dream, right in the midst of an iconic neighborhood where few believed a black woman could wield such influence. Melanie laid the documents out on a stunning mahogany table. As Dahlia pressed pen to paper, each stroke of ink seemed to bring her one step closer to rewriting the unspoken rules of who could and couldn't own such prime real estate. By the time she signed her name on the last page, an unexpected wave of emotion washed over her. She blinked back tears. It's done, Melanie said softly, a proud smile lighting her features. Congratulations, Ms. Summers. You own this whole block on Brighton Way. Dahlia's laughter rang through the elegant foyer. She gently set the pen down, a refreshing sense of power and pride surging through her. Little did she know that the same officer who just questioned her right to be there would soon discover the truth and spark a confrontation more explosive than she'd ever anticipated. The next morning found Officer Darren Cole in the Beverly Hills Police Department's small but well-equipped briefing room, surrounded by his colleagues. The chief droned on about routine updates, a string of vehicle break-ins, the city's efforts to tighten traffic enforcement around Sunset Boulevard, and new policies for community outreach. Darren half listened, preoccupied with the memory of Dahlia from the day before. Something about that encounter stuck with him. He'd been certain he was just doing his job. Yet a nagging voice in the back of his mind whispered that he'd been too quick to judge, that he'd approached her with preconceived notions, ones he wasn't quite ready to name. As the briefing concluded, Darren packed up his notes. Another officer sidled up to him. Officer Linda Morrison, who'd joined the force around the same time he did. Heard about your run-in with that trespasser, she said quietly. Seems you let her off without much checking. Darren stiffened. She wasn't trespassing. I asked for her ID. It looked legitimate. She claimed she was meeting her attorney. He paused, recalling her mention of the property. Said she was there to sign some paperwork. Linda's eyebrows rose. That's interesting. Because I heard rumors floating around about a big real estate purchase on that block. Word is, some hotshot from Los Angeles just scooped up multiple properties. Might explain her meeting with an attorney. Darren blinked, then shrugged. It's possible. Anyway, everything checked out fine. He tried to keep his voice neutral, though the mention of Dahlia's real estate deal piqued his curiosity. The more he thought about it, the more he recalled how composed she'd been. how she hadn't seemed in the least bit intimidated by him. His shift that day was uneventful. Routine traffic stops assisting a local store owner whose alarm kept malfunctioning, patrolling the quiet streets that bustled only with tourists taking photos of palm trees and lavish mansions. Yet in the lulls, his thoughts returned to Dahlia Summers. He found himself replaying the scene at the gate, analyzing her controlled, unwavering demeanor. By the time evening rolled around, Darren had resolved to look into the matter further out of professional curiosity, he told himself. When he heard that the entire block might now be under the ownership of a single individual, something about that made him uneasy. He typed Dahlia's name into the departmental database purely to confirm if she'd ever come up in police records. When no results appeared, he felt an odd mixture of relief and confusion. If she owned the block, or was about to, it would soon be public information through real estate filings. He closed out the search, but the seeds of his curiosity had been planted. He wasn't done with Dahlia Summers, not by a long shot. Meanwhile, Dahlia wasted no time in setting her plans into motion. She hired a top-notch architectural firm to draft blueprints for a series of luxury condominiums that would merge modern design with the classic ambience of Beverly Hills. During a video conference, she explained her vision. "I want a space that respects the neighborhood's history, but also caters to an evolving, diverse clientele. Think timeless meets innovative." Her board of consultants nodded, and the conversation carried a spark of excitement. The real estate market in Beverly Hills was famously restrictive, with local politics and HOA boards wielding enormous power. But Dahlia had done her homework. She'd garnered support from a few forward-thinking city council members who envisioned a more inclusive future for Beverly Hills. Many of them admired her ambition, even if certain older residents might bristle at the idea of change. By late afternoon, Dahlia stepped out for a quick coffee run. She slipped on a stylish trench coat and headed to a nearby Starbucks, one of the few within walking distance. The air was balmy and fragrant with blooming flowers. Sunlight shimmered on the polished hoods of parked sports cars. She felt a renewed sense of belonging striding through the neighborhood with her head high. Inside Starbucks, the barista greeted her with a warm smile. "What can I get started for you, grande soy latte, please?" Dahlia replied her standard order. She tapped her phone on the reader to pay. As she waited for her drink, she sensed the weight of someone's gaze. Turning, she spotted a woman who appeared to be in her early 60s, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that practically screamed old money. The woman, Margaret Whittaker, as Dahlia would soon learn, regarded her with curiosity. "Hello, Margaret," ventured, voice smooth and cultured. "I couldn't help but notice you. Are you new around here?" Dahlia considered her answer carefully, unsure whether to reveal the full extent of her status. Finally, she offered a polite smile. "I suppose you could say that. I'm working on a development project nearby." Margaret's eyes flickered. "Oh, you're an architect." "No," Dahlia clarified the property owner. "I've just bought several lots on Brighton Way." Margaret's lips parted in a small O of surprise. "You must have quite the backing. I've lived here for decades, and I haven't heard a peep about this." Dahlia simply shrugged. "I prefer to let my work speak for itself." As she collected her latte, she sensed Margaret's gaze following her, a swirl of speculation and skepticism in the older woman's piercing eyes. It wouldn't be the last she'd see of Margaret Whittaker, nor the last time she'd feel the silent question that lingered unspoken in the air. Who does this young black woman think she is? Officer Darren Cole felt a spark of unease as he stood in the Beverly Hills PD's cramped research nook an area cluttered with filing cabinets and a single outdated computer. After his quiet shift, he found himself scrolling through city planning notices, looking for any mention of Dahlia Summers or her developments. Despite himself, he needed to satiate his curiosity. Something about their brief interaction had lodged in his mind. Sure enough, in the public records, there it was. A deed transfer for multiple lots on Brighton Way to one Dahlia Elaine Summers dated just the day before. Darren stared at the digital document, his brow creased. He double-checked the address, the signing officer, the notary. Everything was legit. If the rumors were true, this was more than just a few lots. There were commercial spaces, smaller homes, and that large mansion. The scale of the acquisition was massive. He could still recall the look on Dahlia's face when he'd confronted her, the conviction in her eyes. He'd assumed she was out of place. Now it turned out she was the rightful owner of the property she'd stood in front of, and of many more along that block. A flush of embarrassment heated his cheeks. It wasn't that he didn't think black people could own property in Beverly Hills. He just hadn't expected it, not so young, not so confidently. Maybe there were prejudices inside him he hadn't acknowledged before. The notion unsettled him. He exited the file, pushing back from the desk, as if distance could quell his growing discomfort. He didn't want to be the kind of cop who let stereotypes color his interactions. Yet in that moment, he recognized that was exactly what he'd done. Later that evening, he grabbed dinner at the Cheesecake Factory on Beverly Drive, a place popular with both locals and tourists. While he half-heartedly picked at his meal, he couldn't shake the memory of Dahlia's serene composure. How she hadn't cowered, hadn't stammered, hadn't even looked particularly surprised by his suspicion, as if she'd gone through similar encounters 1,000 times before. When he left the restaurant, Darren resolved to make amends. He wasn't sure how, but he felt he owed her an apology, and maybe more than that. In the back of his mind, a notion sparked. If someone had called the cops, simply because she was there, that indicated bigger problems lurking in this seemingly pristine neighborhood. Problems that might not be solved by a single conversation or apology. The news of Dahlia's sweeping property acquisition spread like wildfire among the insular circles of Beverly Hills. Some realtors praised her as a visionary newcomer, shaking up a stale market. Others whispered that she must be a front for a more established investor. Surely a single woman couldn't finance such a deal independently. The rumor mill churned, and in a place where appearances reigned supreme, speculation could be more damaging than fact. At the same time, Dahlia received a surge of inquiries from local business owners, council members, and prospective tenants. Her phone rang non-stop. She delegated most calls to her dedicated team, but she knew she needed to show face. That afternoon, she decided to hold a private meet and greet at the mansion she'd purchased, inviting city officials, community leaders, and a few neighbors to introduce herself and outline her plans for redevelopment. She wanted transparency. She wanted them to see that her project aimed to respect the existing charm of Beverly Hills while welcoming fresh perspectives. By 6 p.m, the mansion's grand foyer had transformed into a networking hub. Soft jazz music played in the background, and waitstaff circulated with trays of sparkling water and delicate canapes. Attendees milled about, eyeing the lavish interior, though more than a few cast furtive glances at Dahlia, who stood by the fireplace in a sleek white jumpsuit, greeting each guest with a poised smile. Councilman Richard Gomez, who'd been a silent ally of Dahlia's from the start, raised a glass in a small toast. To Ms. Summers, he said, voice resonating, "May her endeavor bring growth and unity to our beloved city." There was a smattering of applause, polite, but tinged with caution. Margaret Whittaker, the woman from the Starbucks, sipped her drink coolly. She approached Dahlia, a faint smile on her painted lips. "You certainly move quickly." Margaret commented, her tone civil, but laced with a hint of suspicion. "I respect efficiency. Beverly Hills can be slow to accept change." Dahlia recognized the challenge behind those words. "That's precisely why I wanted to hold this event, to ease concerns and open dialogue," she replied, meeting Margaret's gaze without flinching. A flicker of something apprehension, perhaps, crossed Margaret's eyes. "Well, I look forward to seeing how your plans unfold. This city, it has its rhythms, you know, and people here don't always dance to new tunes easily." Dahlia gave a measured nod, not missing the subtle message. But she refused to let it dampen the pride she felt in hosting this gathering. She moved from group to group, confident in her vision, determined to earn the trust of those who might doubt her. Still in the back of her mind, the memory of Officer Cole lingered. She wondered if he'd heard about her event, if he was curious enough to come, or at least to learn the truth. She had no way of knowing that he was already wrestling with that very question, and that fate would soon throw them together once more in a far more dramatic fashion. Officer Darren Cole watched from the curb across the street as stylish cars pulled up to the mansion's gate, dropping off well-dressed men and women. He caught sight of the glitter of expensive jewelry, the shimmer of designer gowns. There was clearly an event happening. He leaned against his patrol car, debating whether to approach. It wasn't an official call, and he didn't have an invitation. Still, an inexplicable pull drew him toward the house. Just as he contemplated driving away, fate intervened. A neighbor stepped out to retrieve a package from an Amazon delivery truck and immediately noticed Darren's presence. Recognizing him from prior patrols, the neighbor waved him over. "Officer Cole. Everything all right?" "Yes, sir," Darren replied, though he wasn't entirely sure. "I just noticed the gathering. Figured I'd do a quick check." He tried to keep his tone neutral, as though he were simply being vigilant. In truth, he felt a twist of anxiety in his chest. He wanted to see Dahlia, speak to her, maybe. But how to do that without seeming intrusive? Before the neighbor could respond, another car approached an older Bentley. The passenger window rolled down, revealing a distinguished older gentleman who called out, "Officer, I believe this is the Summers event for local stakeholders. Could you direct me to the valet?" He held out a gilded invitation as proof. Darren glanced at the card, elegantly embossed with Dahlia's name. The man's assumption that Darren was working valet duty for the event made Darren bristle, but he swallowed his pride. He pointed to the roped-off section by the curb. "Valet is right over there, sir." Moments later, the Bentley glided toward the designated spot. The neighbor gave Darren a conspiratorial look. "Seems like half the city's big shots are going inside. Maybe you should go in too, just to keep an eye on things." Darren's mind whirled. The suggestion was innocent enough. Maybe so, he said with forced casualness, though he knew this was his best opportunity to set things right with Dahlia. "I'll check in. Make sure everything's okay." Heart hammering, he crossed the street, heading toward the gated entrance. His uniform gave him an air of official authority, and no one questioned him as he slipped past the elegantly dressed crowd. Stepping into the foyer, he scanned the room until his gaze landed on Dahlia, radiant by the fireplace. She was listening intently to someone talking in hushed tones. Darren hesitated. Approaching her now felt almost invasive. But just then Dahlia's eyes flicked toward him and recognition widened them. For a beat, neither of them moved. He could almost see a kaleidoscope of emotions flit across her face. Surprise, wariness, curiosity. Summoning his courage, Darren tipped his head in a greeting and wove through the mingling guests. It was time to confront his own biases, to apologize, and if she'd allow to start a dialogue, he feared might already be too late to salvage. Dahlia didn't try to hide her astonishment as Officer Cole approached. She excused herself from her conversation with a local business owner, stepping away to meet him. Though she kept her posture poised, a knot of tension wound tight in her stomach. She recalled the sting of his suspicion the day before. Seeing him here, uniform and all, brought that feeling surging back. "Officer Cole," she said, voice calm but tinged with caution. "I didn't expect to see you tonight." He cleared his throat. Awkwardness evident in the set of his shoulders. "Ms. Summers, I'm here unofficially. I saw there was a gathering and I guess I just wanted to make sure everything was in order." She crossed her arms lightly, not in outright defensiveness, but as a subtle reminder that she wasn't going to be intimidated on her own property. "As you can see, it's a private event, networking and planning." Officer Cole gave a slow nod, dropping his gaze to the polished marble floor, then meeting her eyes again. I wanted to apologize for the way I approached you yesterday," he said, stumbling slightly over his words. "I realized I made assumptions." A slight hush seemed to cloak them amidst the hum of nearby chatter. Dahlia felt a flash of vindication, followed by the slightest softening of her guarded stance. Assumptions about what she pressed, gently encouraging him to speak the truth she suspected he'd been wrestling with. He exhaled. "About whether you belonged here. About your intentions. It wasn't fair. And I realized that I treated you like a suspect because you didn't fit the image I had in my head of who owns property in Beverly Hills. That was wrong." For a moment, Dahlia said nothing, letting the weight of his admission linger. She appreciated his candor. "Thank you for saying that," she replied quietly. "It means something to hear you recognize that. But an apology is just a start." He nodded gravely, the lines of remorse etched into his face. "I know, I don't expect forgiveness overnight. I'd just like you to know I'm trying to do better. If there's anything I can do, well, I'm here." Dahlia allowed a small, tentative smile. She wasn't sure she could trust him yet, but it felt good to see genuine remorse. "I appreciate the gesture," she replied, her voice softening. "For now, please feel free to enjoy the gathering as my guest. We're discussing big plans for this neighborhood, and that involves a strong relationship with local law enforcement as well." Officer Cole's eyes held gratitude and perhaps relief. He nodded again, stepping to the side to let her return to her guests. He didn't linger far, though. As the evening wore on, Dahlia caught glimpses of him quietly observing the flow of conversation, occasionally offering a respectful nod to those who approached him. An hour later, he slipped out, leaving only the faintest ripple in his wake. But his presence and his apology left Dahlia strangely unsettled in a hopeful way. Maybe, just maybe, Beverly Hills could be changed from within one uncomfortable but honest conversation at a time. In the days that followed, Dahlia immersed herself in a whirlwind of planning. Her design team produced conceptual renderings for the future condominium complex. The digital images showcased sleek glass facades, accented with greenery communal courtyards, and subtle nods to the Spanish Revival style common in older Beverly Hills architecture. Yet not everyone embraced her vision. Margaret Whitaker, who chaired a prominent neighborhood association, repeatedly voiced her concerns. "We must protect the historical integrity of this area," she stated in a meeting at City Hall, her elegant posture giving her words a certain gravitas. Ms. Summers proposes a drastic change that could overshadow our cherished architectural heritage. Dahlia countered Margaret's objections with patience and research. "I respect the neighborhood's aesthetic. My architects have incorporated Spanish tile roofs, ornate balconies, and other design elements that blend with local traditions. These units will attract a range of residents, diversifying our community while preserving its character." Their debate formed the crux of many a public hearing. Some labeled it a generational clash, a modern, ambitious developer challenging the long-established guardians of Beverly Hills exclusivity. A few local papers even spun the narrative around race, pointing out that a black woman of Dahlia's age and background was boldly transforming a city known for its elite enclaves. Dahlia tried to ignore the sensationalism, focusing instead on the practical details necessary to gain final approval. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Officer Darren Cole continued to mull over the internal conflicts he'd triggered with his apology. Part of him wanted to remain in contact with Dahlia to learn more about her plans and rectify his earlier prejudice. But he hesitated, fearing he might overstep his professional boundaries. That changed when he caught wind of rumored protests. Anonymous flyers were circulating, warning that outsiders were trying to take over beloved neighborhoods. The language was inflammatory, borderline hate speech. Concerned that these protests might escalate, Darren decided to contact Dahlia directly. He found her number through a public press release for her project and dialed. When she answered, her voice was cordial but guarded. "Ms. Summers here. Hi. It's Darren Cole." "Officer Cole," he clarified, in case she didn't recognize the name. "I've, heard rumors of protests forming around your properties. I wanted to check if you've received any threats or suspicious messages." A pause, heavy unspoken tensions lingering there. "I've heard rumors too," Dahlia finally said. "But so far I haven't been directly threatened. I'd like to keep a close watch on your area, especially during the next public hearing. Would that be all right?" She hesitated, but only for a heartbeat. "Yes, officer. That would be fine." And thus began a fragile alliance. Darren wanted to protect Dahlia's right to develop the neighborhood she now owned, to quell any violence that might erupt from intolerant corners. Dahlia, despite her lingering reservations, sensed that working with the police might be a necessary step in forging a new era of community relations. If they could stand together, developer and officer, they might set an example that transcended old divides. On a balmy Saturday morning, the tension in the air was palpable as a modest crowd gathered outside the Beverly Hills City Hall. The building's iconic Spanish Revival facade stood as a backdrop to what was shaping up to be a contentious public hearing. Dahlia arrived early, accompanied by Melanie Park and a few members of her architectural team. They came prepared with detailed plans, 3D renderings, and a portfolio of endorsements from city officials who saw value in Dahlia's approach. In contrast, Margaret Whitaker and her supporters arrived in matching blazers and crisp white blouses, brandishing neatly printed protest signs, "Preserve our heritage." No overdevelopment. Say no to outsiders. The signage didn't explicitly name Dahlia, but their intentions were clear. The tension rose another notch when local news crews rolled in, hoping to capture a dramatic face-off. Officer Darren Cole was one of several police officers assigned to maintain order. He stood by the cordoned area, scanning the crowd for any sign of trouble. Spotting Dahlia, he offered a small nod of acknowledgement. She returned it, her expression a mixture of resolve and nervousness. Inside the Grand Council chamber, the seats were packed. An agenda was distributed, with Dahlia's proposal occupying the central spotlight. The council chair, an older gentleman with steel-grey hair, named Leonard Beck, led the proceedings. "We have a significant item on the docket," he announced. "Ms. Dahlia Summers's development plan for the Brighton Way block. Ms. Summers, please present." Dahlia stepped up to the podium, nerves fluttering in her stomach. But she spoke with unwavering confidence, detailing her architectural vision, the economic benefits, the potential for job creation, and the inclusive community spirit she wanted to foster. As she talked, some heads in the audience nodded in approval. Others remained stone-faced, arms crossed. Margaret Whittaker was next. She stood, voice measured but forceful warning of unsightly changes, outsized modern structures, and the erosion of the city's identity. She didn't mention Dahlia's race, but the undertone was there, a coded cry to maintain the character of Beverly Hills, a euphemism that many understood to mean keep it exclusive. The hearing dragged on, each side presenting arguments with passion. Proponents praised Dahlia's bold approach to reimagining Beverly Hills. Opponents decried her perceived inexperience and the threat of too much change too quickly. Tensions flared when a small group outside the chambers began chanting slogans. Officer Cole and his colleagues swiftly intervened, ensuring the protest remained peaceful. By late afternoon, the council postponed the final decision, citing the need for further research. The stalemate left Dahlia exhausted. As she exited the building, the crowd still lingered, reporters clamoring for sound bites. Darren spotted her from across the plaza and made his way over. When their eyes met, she offered a weary, grateful smile, wordlessly acknowledging the support he'd given. Neither knew that the seeds of greater conflict were still waiting to sprout, nor that karmic forces were about to intervene, reshaping alliances and unleashing consequences no one could have foreseen. 2 weeks later, Dahlia's development project hit a sudden, massive roadblock. An anonymous tipster filed a complaint with the Beverly Hills Building and Safety Department, claiming that the soil beneath the proposed construction site contained hazardous materials. The city, bound by protocol, issued a halt on all progress, pending an environmental inspection. For Dahlia, this was a devastating blow. Without clearance, her contractors couldn't move forward. Time and money dripped away like water from a cracked pipe. Meanwhile, Margaret Whittaker seized the moment, publicly expressing grave concerns about potential health risks. She even suggested that Dahlia's team had failed in their due diligence, sowing doubt in the minds of local residents. The local press leapt on the story, reprinting the allegations on front pages, often overshadowing Dahlia's carefully curated facts. Frustrated and increasingly suspicious, Dahlia decided to investigate the source of the complaint. She enlisted help from an environmental consultancy firm, who assured her that preliminary tests showed no signs of contaminants. Still, the city's formal testing took priority, and the process threatened to drag on for weeks, if not months. One late evening, as Dahlia pored over paperwork in the mansion's study, her phone buzzed with a text from a withheld number. "Look into Whittaker's ties. She's not as squeaky clean as she appears." Startled, Dahlia reread the message. She didn't have proof it was related to the complaint, but the timing felt too coincidental to ignore. Had Margaret orchestrated this fiasco? Meanwhile, Officer Darren Cole was dealing with pressure from within his own department. Some senior officers loyal to long-standing community figures like Margaret hinted that Darren should stop taking Dahlia's side so openly. "We have to look out for the interests of our established residents," one superior told him in a clipped tone. There's a reason they pay taxes here. But Darren, who'd begun to see the underbelly of bias in Beverly Hills, remained quietly resolute. He believed Dahlia was being targeted, and he couldn't just stand by. During an off-duty lunch break at a humble burger joint on Wilshire Boulevard, he sat in his car phone in hand, debating whether to call Dahlia directly. Eventually, he worked up the nerve. She answered, sounding tired but determined. He hesitated, then blurted, "I heard about the environmental complaint. If you need anything, any official records, or if you suspect foul play, let me know." Dahlia's breath caught. She realized that ironically this officer who once questioned her very presence might be one of the few people truly in her corner. "Thank you, Officer Cole. I appreciate that. Actually, I just got a tip that Margaret might have some hidden connections. Think you can find out anything through official channels?" Darren exhaled. He was stepping onto shaky ethical ground, but the memory of his initial bias burned hot in his mind. He wanted to atone to prove that a police officer's duty extended to all citizens, not just the wealthy incumbents. "I'll see what I can do," he said. They exchanged a brief goodbye, and as he ended the call, Darren realized the lines between personal conviction and professional duty had irrevocably blurred. Over the next few days, Darren performed discreet checks on open-source records regarding Margaret Whittaker. What he uncovered wasn't exactly damning, but it raised eyebrows. Margaret's late husband had served on multiple zoning boards, and her family's philanthropic efforts included major donations to local political figures who opposed new developments. There were subtle patterns of influence, nothing overtly illegal, but enough to suggest she might be leveraging her social capital to stymie Dahlia's project. He found no direct evidence linking her to the anonymous environmental complaint, but the puzzle pieces pointed in her direction. Armed with this information, Darren texted Dahlia, "Have some leads. Let's talk in person." She suggested meeting for lunch at a casual cafe off Rodeo Drive, a place quiet enough to avoid paparazzi. They sat at an outdoor table, the ambiance at once chic and relaxed. Dahlia sipped her green tea, watching Darren with cautious optimism. He slid a folder across to her. Photocopies of public records campaign, finance reports, old news clippings. "It's all circumstantial," he warned softly, "but it shows how deep her connections go." Dahlia's eyes flickered as she scanned the contents. This could paint a picture of motive, she noted. She's been pulling strings. The environmental complaint, someone in her circle might have filed it. Darren nodded, his police cap resting on the seat next to him. "I can't prove it yet. But if the city's investigation concludes there's no hazard, it'll at least clear your name." Dahlia leaned back, exhaling heavily. The project timeline is already thrown off. Investors are getting anxious, and we're bleeding money. That might be part of her strategy. Delay me until I can't sustain it anymore. A thoughtful silence settled between them. Outside, the bustle of Beverly Hills continued, tourists snapping photos, luxury cars cruising by, the faint aroma of high-end coffee shops mingling with the fresh air. Darren studied Dahlia's expression, imagining the monumental pressure she was under. She looked elegant, but behind her composure he sensed frustration and fatigue. "I want to see you succeed," he said at length. "I've seen enough to know that what's happening here isn't just about architecture or environmental safety. It's about something bigger who gets to live and build in certain places." Dahlia's gaze softened, a trace of gratitude warming her features. "Thanks. It's strange to feel so alone in a crowd, but I'm glad you're here and that you believe me. I'm going to fight this until the truth comes out." They finished lunch with a renewed sense of collaboration, though neither was fully prepared for just how fiery the coming confrontation would be. The invisible lines between them, officer and developer, doubt and trust, were fading. Yet the city's old guard, spurred by individuals like Margaret, had no intention of making Dahlia's triumph easy. And when karma finally struck, it promised to show no mercy to those who used fear and prejudice as their weapons. A fateful Thursday morning arrived that changed the entire landscape of Dahlia's struggle. The city's environmental inspectors concluded their analysis revealing no significant contaminants on the Brighton Way properties. The official report cleared Dahlia of any wrongdoing and lifted the halt order. For a moment, it seemed like a stunning victory, proof that the complaint had been baseless. Local news channels updated their coverage reflecting Dahlia's innocence. Yet the celebration was short-lived. Within hours of the announcement, Dahlia received a cryptic email from an untraceable address. "You might have passed this round, but you'll never be accepted here. Sell and leave before it's too late." Attached was a photograph of the mansion she owned, taken at night with a red slash crudely drawn over the front doors. Alarmed, Dahlia contacted Officer Cole immediately. He arrived at the mansion, joined by a couple of other officers, to survey any potential threat. There was no visible sign of vandalism, but the menace in that email loomed large. Darren felt a chill creep down his spine as he examined the photo. "We'll keep a patrol around the block," he assured Dahlia. "And if we can trace the email, we will." As if the tension weren't high enough that very afternoon, Margaret Whittaker appeared at the mansion's doorstep unannounced. Dahlia answered the door herself. Margaret stood there, face impassive, arms folded over a tailored blazer. "Congratulations on the environmental clearance," she said, though her tone lacked any sincerity. "Thank you," Dahlia replied, matching Margaret's coolness. "Would you like to come in?" Margaret's mouth tightened. "I'd prefer to speak out here if you don't mind." She cast a dismissive glance at the foyer's luxurious interior, as if the house itself offended her. "You must understand that not everyone in this neighborhood is comfortable with your plans. I hear rumors about intimidation tactics going both ways." Dahlia's jaw clenched. "Are you accusing me of something, Margaret?" "Not at all." Margaret demurred. "Just offering a friendly suggestion. Perhaps it's best to revise your plans. A smaller development, fewer units, something more in line with the traditional style. That might help you avoid unrest." There it was, the veiled threat. Dahlia stared at the older woman, feeling a simmering anger rise. "Is that your subtle way of warning me off my legally approved project?" Margaret shrugged. "I'm simply stating facts. Change is never easy, especially in a place like Beverly Hills. If you insist on forcing your vision, you may find people pushing back in ways you don't anticipate." With that, she turned on her heel and strode down the marble steps. Dahlia stood there, heart pounding. The message was clear. Margaret and her allies wouldn't hesitate to escalate. And as Dahlia closed the door, a wave of renewed determination swept over her. She was not about to back down, not when she'd come this far, not when she had the right to be here. What neither woman could foresee was that fate had already orchestrated a dramatic twist. Karma was about to slam down upon those who wielded their power with unjust motives, forever altering the balance of influence in this storied neighborhood. In the ensuing days, events spiraled with a swiftness that stunned everyone. A series of investigative articles appeared in the Los Angeles Times, exposing corruption in the local building and zoning boards. Bribery allegations, misuse of funds, and under-the-table deals involving influential residents. While no single article named Margaret Whittaker, outright her late husband's ties to some of the figures under investigation, cast a dark shadow over her family's legacy. Suddenly, the same old guard that had rallied around Margaret found themselves scrambling to distance their reputations from the scandal. Dahlia watched the fallout from her newly furnished study, a mix of disbelief and cautious optimism swirling in her chest. She had known something was amiss in how quickly the environmental complaint had been filed, but she hadn't anticipated corruption running this deep. As more details emerged, anonymous tips, whistleblower testimonies, her own project came under renewed scrutiny, but this time in a favorable light. People began to see that the obstacles she faced might have been orchestrated by a network protecting their own interests. Margaret Whittaker, once the poised socialite, was now conspicuously absent from her usual haunts. The rumor mill said she'd taken a sudden vacation in the south of France. The neighborhood association she chaired wavered members resigning or claiming ignorance of her more extreme tactics. Without Margaret's influence, resistance to Dahlia's development project cooled dramatically. Meanwhile, Officer Darren Cole found himself the reluctant face of integrity within the police department. As the corruption scandal extended, tendrils in multiple directions, some on the force found themselves implicated for turning blind eyes to wealthy donors. Darren's earlier stance supporting Dahlia investigating threats now seemed prescient. Though he wasn't entirely spared from departmental politics, he felt vindicated that the city's rot was being exposed. His commanding officer even pulled him aside after a shift, quietly saying, "You did right by Ms. Summers. Keep it up." The final blow to Dahlia's naysayers landed during the next city council session, where Councilman Richard Gomez presented an impassioned plea to fast-track Dahlia's project, citing the fresh revelations of impropriety that had plagued local governance. The council voted decisively in Dahlia's favor, granting her the green light to commence construction. On the bright morning following the vote, Dahlia walked the block. She now fully controlled her footsteps, echoing along the manicured pavement. This time she felt no eyes of suspicion, no hush of disapproval. Instead, construction crews waved cheerfully as they prepared equipment. Passers-by smiled, some even congratulating her on the big news. It was a moment that shimmered with possibility. As Dahlia reached the corner lot, she noticed Darren leaning against his cruiser, watching the bustle of the construction site. He gave her a nod, tipping his hat respectfully. She smiled back, gratitude shining in her eyes. For all the drama, for all the underhanded machinations, karma had indeed struck, but not at her. It had rebounded on those who weaponized prejudice for their own gain. And now, at last, Dahlia Summers stood victorious, the rightful owner of a Beverly Hills block and the architect of its promising new future. From a single confrontation outside a gated mansion to city-wide scandal and comeuppance, Dahlia's rise in Beverly Hills proves us that determination and integrity can outshine even the darkest attempts to block progress. In the end, truth and justice prevail as those who manipulate the system for personal gain are unmasked, leaving Dahlia free to build the inclusive, visionary development she dreamed of. Her story is a potent reminder that no matter the barriers be, they racial prejudice, entrenched privilege, or old guard corruption, a resilient spirit can overcome them. If Dahlia's journey taught us anything, it's that real change demands courage, unity, and the will to stand firm when the world tries to push you away. If you found inspiration and excitement in this dramatic tale, be sure to hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that challenge expectations and celebrate triumph. Your support fuels the conversation.